Good evening and welcome to another Italer conversation, a leadership conversation. And I'm so excited to be hosting you today, as well as answering some of your questions that you might have for us today. Again, joining us for this evening conversation as we talk to young leaders, young emerging leaders. I've got with me Sean David, who is in the studio with us for this live conversation. Good evening to you.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for having me.
More than welcome. So we are continuing our conversation from last week. If you joined us last week, you know we started talking about young and emerging leaders in if they are in receiving the training that they should in order to take on leadership roles. We kindly ask you to subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, so you can get notifications every time we are on. Invite a friend. Invite every young person that you know is desires to be a leader one day. Invite the current leaders that you know within your local cities, local nations. You know, we want everyone to be involved in this conversation as it involves and has an impact on our future. So, like, share, and be prepared to ask as many questions as you would like, and also would love to hear your input tonight as we talk about raising leaders, raising the new generation of leaders. So, before we go into the topic of tonight, I want to hear from you a little bit about last week you mentioned you're into politics. And we just want to hear a little bit about what made you go into politics as an emerging leader, a current leader, and someone who falls within young and older generation. What made you go into politics in the first place?
Thanks for that question. Um, I've always believed that if you don't get involved in politics, politics will control most of your life. And if you don't get involved in it, you wouldn't understand what areas that you need to be careful when building a business, when running a charity. All of these things have laws and guidelines that have been provided by the government in order to build a sane society. And in politics, you get the opportunity to just not know about it, but also influence it. When we talk about issues around racism, or we talk about issues in African development, most of it will be accelerated if we get our politics right. So my call to most young people is to get involved, and I wanted to lead by example. So I have worked with the Nigerian political system in 2 campaigns, and also worked with pressure groups within Nigeria, and sort of like NGOs within that political space to engage presidential candidates, to also have town hall meetings with diasporans. So I've worked with the Nigerian government on that, or the Nigerian system on that. But I'm also working with the UK system to also address things like housing issues, antisocial behaviors, things around the well-being and mental well-being of our population as well.
Wow, that's amazing. I always say to young people that you can complain about something, but until you take action to do something about it, nothing is going to change. So you are the one that can invoke the change that you want to see. Thank you so much for that. If you're watching us, whatever category you fall in, whether you are the older generation or the new generation, we want to hear from you. What do you think the young people should do? Or if you're a young person, what do you think the older generation should do in terms of leadership within this current state that we are in as a nation? Whatever nation you're from, you might be in the third world nations, you might be in the second world nations, you might be in the first world nations, whatever nation you live in, we want to hear your thoughts regarding these 2 different generations that are in current leadership and those that are rising into the future leadership roles. One thing that that fascinates me in this world that we live in is it is filled with young people. I think the statistic says that I think over 70 people are within young adults. They fall into the category of young people. But yet you don't find as much people within certain leadership roles, whether it's in the business world, politics, whatever sphere you might find it. You find that it's actually the older generation that takes so much space, yet we have more young people in the nations. What are your thoughts on that?
So just to make sure that I get the question correctly, can you repeat it? Just like rephrase the question.
What are your thoughts that we've got more, the population is filled with younger generation, like 70% of the generation is younger people, yet we have very few within leadership and strategic roles, whether it's in business or it's in politics or any effective leadership roles?
Okay, great question. I think from the business side, we have seen a drastic change with startups and entrepreneurs and disruptors like Mark Zuckerberg and the rest of them, who are relatively young, and they've disrupted the business world. So we have business leadership there. Political leadership, not so much. And I would say that it's a mixture of a few things. Most people at a young age looking, maybe if you're lucky, 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead. And those years that are ahead of them, they are looking to be economically stable. So they're not looking to power or to settle, as it were. And sometimes politics is seen as a place where you settle. So it's a place where you go after you've retired. So there's a perception around politics, number one. There's also the perception that you need a lot of money in order to go into politics. So you find that a lot of young people are like, I'll make the money, then I'll go into politics. And the time is, the time span is quite large. So I think that's one of the things. The generation that we live in now, millennials, Gen Z, they're more focused around building an empire. And then they think about politics later. So that's, but you're right in the sense that there are lots of more young people than there are people that represents them at the age that they do within politics.
Wow. When I was reading around the news, I'm trying to remember her name, the former Prime Minister of Scotland. What's her name again, if you can remind me? Her name is gone, but the former Prime Minister of Scotland, she just resigned a few weeks ago.
Nicola, is that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Sturgeon.
Yes, exactly. She joined politics when she was 16. And I was like, wow, that is something you can hardly see, especially in third world countries, to see a young person so involved. She was campaigning, running groups from the age of 16. No wonder she became a prime minister at some point, because she knew what she believed in. She knew what she wanted to see in Scotland, and she fought for it from the age of 16. I wonder, how can we get our young people to be so passionate about what they believe in? I mean, is it something that has to come from their parents or from the current leaders, or it's something that has to come from within? And if so, how can someone get that so much passion to do something, especially from a young age?
Yeah, I think it's the messaging. The messaging is very important. We need more young people to realize that the future that they are desiring for themselves is at stake if they don't get involved in politics. You will find that the wealth and inequality gap is growing much bigger by the day. It's getting wider and wider. It's becoming more difficult for a young professional to buy a property in the UK, for example. It's
Yeah.
becoming a lot more difficult for you as a diasporan to go back to your country and feel safe. So all of these issues are there. So your future is being threatened. And that message has to come from present leaders as well as young leaders like myself and yourself, will play in this space to actually encourage more people to get involved in any way. Volunteering is a way to get involved. You don't have to run for a political office, but your presence in that system makes a huge difference.
Wow, that is amazing. If you're watching us and you have any young person around you, or you know any young person, which I know most of you do, just send them a link. Let them listen to this conversation so that they can be inspired to make the change that they want to see in their future. Because one thing I think sometimes young people forget is the generation they look at as older people are going to go one day, and they will be left with whatever decisions they were making to deal with. And at some point, if we did nothing, our children, the next generation, are going to have to do something about what we did nothing about. You know, how do we really get even older people? Let's talk about older people for a minute, because I think sometimes there's a lack of a greater vision for the next 20, 30 years. I believe that if you have a vision for the next 30 years or 50 years, you should know that you might not be around. So surely it's a good idea to get someone who might be around at that time that you're gone to be involved in what you're doing. I mean, what message can we actually give to older people? Last week we talked about having opportunities, working with younger people. How can actually older people get to do that, especially those within strategic leadership roles?
So one key thing that needs to happen is that we need people who are currently in that space, whether it's business, politics, or wherever it is, to start building succession plans. You should have a succession plan in place. You need to be able to identify people who will take over from you when you are no longer here. And you have to do that right now, because there's no better time for you to do it but right now. You have quite a lot of young people who are energetic, who are
Very.
driven, who are very well educated, who understand the system, who have grown in the system. They are very, very intelligent. They're more intelligent than you think they are. So it's time for you to actually look for those people and put in your time to create a succession plan with them. And what you can do to start off is start off mentoring. You can start mentoring these people. Give them a call and say, I see what you're doing. I would like to offer my time on a weekly basis to touch base with you and help you in any area that I can with my expertise. I think that should be one conversation that we should be having now, and providing mentorship. Another area that we can, and I mentioned this last week, is investment. I think investment is very critical. This investment has to be targeted. It has to be very clear. It has to have a clear vision. It has to tie to a 20-year, 30-year plan so that you are building a legacy with the person that you're going in partnership with. So I think there's a lot of work to do in that space. There are a lot of ideas that can be thrown around. People have suggested all sorts of things on the internet. So take a good read and see what's out there. But my message will be, it is time to build a succession plan.
Wow. You know, you're reminding me of something that my husband always says to me, that, as a mother, sometimes you just want to guard your children, protect your children. So he's always saying, like, they are capable of more things than you think. They can do that, but I always want to keep doing it for them. Do you think that the older generation trusts the young people, especially to put them in certain strategic roles where decisions need to be made concerning a nation, concerning a business, concerning any type of change that needs to be made?
So I think first of all, the older people, they have to immerse themselves in sessions done by Etwala, for example. They have to immerse themselves in sessions like that so that they can unlearn certain things before they try and build this succession plan. It's a natural thing to not trust somebody else with your baby. It's a natural thing to not trust somebody else with your money if you've worked hard for it. It's natural. However, if you go through the right structure and you learn the right perspective, you can put that aside and put that distrust aside, because it's a natural thing to distrust. But to answer your question directly, yes, I think older people don't tend to trust the younger people in our, you know, sort of in our society.
Wow. Greetings to every single person that is joining us. We've got someone saying hi from Bahamas. Good evening, wherever you're tuning in from. So wonderful to have you in this conversation. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the raising a new generation of leaders. What are your thoughts on young people, young emerging leaders? What are your thoughts on older generation of leaders? We would love to hear your thoughts in how we can integrate the two, because I think it's vital that both the old and the new work together in order to build the nation that we want to see. My thought was, one of my thoughts was, if you train somebody and you truly believe in the training that you put inside of them, the input that you put inside somebody, surely you ought to be able to trust yourself that you did a good job. So could there be a point whereby maybe there isn't enough input from the older generation to actually trust that these people can do this work?
So I think definitely if you've not done the work, then you shouldn't expect the reward. You have to really put in the work to tutor, to build and invest and lead the next generation. It has to be a commitment on your side first. And it's that commitment that will keep you going when you will question whether you've done enough. So you will question whether you've done enough. But in order to keep going, you have to be committed, first of all, to that. And also unlearn, you know, those things that make you sort of be in control. And it's a natural thing when you are a manager of something. So if you're the managing director of your company at the moment, you have to have the personality type of, you know, or you must have some mindset around control. You must want to control things because it's part of the requirement of a manager. A manager must be able to control his team, must be able to control manufacturing, his resources, his goods, his pricing. He has to be able to manage all of that. But when you are a chairman, when you are on the board, you have a different mindset. So you need to unlearn the pattern that has helped you grow that business so that you can function better in your new position. So I'll give you an example. Sam Walton, who built Walmart, and he had built it to over 700 stores, no, 200 and something stores at the time when he retired. And it was a multi-billion corporation at the time. It was around 3 point something billion. And this is 1980s. So it was a huge, successful business. And then he chose to retire. But when he retired, named a new CEO, and continued, and the company continued. He took a different role this time. And his role was he visited every store, spoke to customers, spoke to the store managers, got information from them, related to them, built a culture that was the foundation for the growth or the further growth of the company he had set up.
No.
So what you will need to do, as you know, as that new leader, I'll call you a new leader, leading the next generation of leaders, you would have to take that shepherd look. You're going to have to take that look of a shepherd who is looking out for his flock and making sure that no evil befalls them.
Yeah. Wow. Is that then what we have? I wonder what we have missing in our third world nations, because that is one thing we focus on in Nitwala, developing nation, third world nations especially. One thing I love about, I think it is Walker's Crisp. You know, the flavor has been the same over years, like over years. They've had different managers, different CEOs. They have, you know, the founder has been long gone, but the flavor remains the same. Whereas sometimes, I mean, if you go to the third world nation, something you ate 20, 30 years ago tastes different today. You know, how do we develop a system, or is it even possible to develop systems whereby what works continues to work over generations, especially if we manage to do the change that needs to be done within the current state of our nations, whether it's especially within political leaders, because that's where we've seen, like what we said, a lot of older people that they are still there with the same old mindset, yet they know that within the next 20, 30 years, they're not going to be there. If per adventure the new leaders emerges and takes certain positions, how can we actually build systems that will, you know, last for decades?
So, in order to build a system, and I'm going to use my IT hat here. Okay, in order to build a system, you need to have identified processes. You
Yeah.
have to have identified how things work currently. And then you do a gap analysis of those processes. You look at areas of improvement within those processes, and then you put governance around that in order to make it a system. And then you put training, you put other factors. But essentially, you start with identifying clear processes that are
Yeah.
there that will be the building block for that system. So we cannot build a system that is passed down to a further generation
Yeah.
if we've not identified the process. A lot of our businesses are still in someone's head. A lot of our knowledge is still in someone's head.
Yeah.
We need to start data dumping all our experiences, write books, write system processes, write guidelines within your business, write your recipe model, patent your recipe model, make sure that it is an intellectual property of your business so that when you're long gone, when there's a new management, they can go back to the vault and pick up your recipe and repeat it over and over again. So there's no rocket science here. The problem is a lot of us don't know where to start. A
Yeah.
lot of us are not even willing to pay for the service that is required in order for you to build this.
Wow. That is amazing. You're reminding me, you know, I like to give examples. I heard a story of a man that was very rich, and when he passed on, none of his family members, talk less of his children or wife, could had access to his wealth because he didn't write it down. He had it nowhere. He didn't leave any paperwork, nothing. And 2 years later, the children were left in poverty for years. And 2 years later, the lawyers came to find the family and let them know what they had access to. But I think that is just exactly what you're saying, that we've seen it over and over again, that every time we've had a different government, they had to start from scratch. There was never a continuation of, this was done, which was great, we're going to continue so that it can continue to benefit the nation. It's always a new starting point. And that starting point, someone is not in the seat long enough to establish it for it to continue within the next presidency or the next executive team or whoever is in leadership next. I wonder what your thoughts are on, on how we can truly be in a place whereby, I'm talking from the diaspora now, from third world nations. How can we begin to have a space whereby we can have both generations in the same room and actually have the older generation take on and listen to what the younger generations have to say? Or do you think that's something that's not possible? We completely have to get rid of them for us to establish something new.
So let me speak to the young generation on this. No one's going to invite you.
Wow.
No one's going to invite you. You're going to have to invite yourself. So I would switch that question around, that what can younger people do to bridge that gap? We have to go into the room. So for example, if you are talking about religious houses, churches, for example, if you have issues with the way that the organization has been set up and you feel like young people are not involved, get involved in something, volunteer to be that person, go to the seminary school, become a priest, become a pastor, and go through proper schooling and get involved in that same church. You don't have to start your own church. You can get involved in that church. So that's the church. Business-wise, the same thing happens. You look for a growing African business, a growing third world business. Get involved in that business. Go there and say, you know what, I'm going to work for you at a, I usually will charge £100,000 a month, but I'm going to charge you £10,000 a month because I want to commit into building a bigger empire, both for you as a business and for the third world. You go there with a clear vision and sell yourself to that business. You'll be surprised how many people would happily welcome you and say, no, please come in. And that can be the same thing as advisory. You don't even have to be employed. You can offer your advisory services to these businesses. You can offer your time to coach or mentor their staff members. Let them see your commitment. Let them see the value you bring to the table as well, because no one's ever going to just hand you anything. You're going to have to go for it. So it's more for the young people to get involved in that sense.
Wow. And with this, how then do we get to that point? Because coming from a cultural background, if we can touch on that a little bit, we come from a cultural background where it says you don't speak to your elders unless you're spoken to. How then do we break that mindset? Because it is a mindset that many grow up with, and where they get to a point whereby even though they want to fight for change, they will not fight because I respect my elders even if I see them do wrong.
Yeah. And I totally understand that. It's important to value our elders, and I think that's one thing that the developed world is suffering from as well. But that's my personal view, right? So I think it's important to value our older people, but I also think that we need to get braver. We need to be more brave. To stand for something and let the adults know what we stand for. The
Yeah.
more we do that, the more they will give us respect back. It might be a long journey, but the moment you make it clear that number one, right, I'm an adult, I have grown up. Number two, I am self-sustaining. Number three, right, I am adding value in the area that I'm working in.
Wow.
So I'm coming with you, I'm coming to you with facts and truths, and I'm going to speak this. And this is my vision. Take it or leave it. So we have to get braver as well as young people, but not lose focus on that cultural respect. That is very important.
Wow, thank you so much. Again, ladies and gentlemen, out of time, not out of questions. I was enjoying the conversation myself. Thank you so much for your input, for your words of wisdom this evening. We will surely be with you again next week. Thank you guys so for tuning in tonight. We are indeed Itwala Europe Leadership Conversation with Sean. I'm saying your name wrong because I'm not Nigerian. I'm gonna call you Sean. We call it Sean in English. Sean David.
Just say David or Nomusi. That's fine.
Thank you so much for your words of wisdom. Guys, we've heard it. Young people, be brave. Let us be brave and stand for what we believe in. And older generation leaders, listen to us when we speak. And we are coming. We are coming here. We're not coming after you. We are coming to you for a conversation that can change our nations. This is Itwala. We'll be with you same time next week on the same channel. Do subscribe, do like and share this video to